Captain Marcus Blackwood had served the royal family for 15 years, standing guard at the palace gates with unwavering dedication. His tall frame and stern expression had become a familiar sight to everyone who entered the grand estate. The golden morning sun cast long shadows across the marble courtyard as he began his shift, adjusting his ceremonial sword and checking his watch. The palace was buzzing with unusual activity today. King Edward's new wife, Queen Victoria, had moved in just 3 months ago, bringing her 7-year-old daughter Emma from her previous marriage. The little girl with curly brown hair and sad eyes had caught Marcus's attention from the very first day. Unlike other children who might giggle or wave at the guards, Emma always walked with her head down, clutching her mother's hand tightly. Marcus had noticed things that others seemed to overlook. The way Emma flinched when adults raised their voices. How she never seemed to have friends over to play in the royal gardens. The expensive clothes that somehow always looked too big on her small frame, as if she was trying to disappear inside them. Most troubling of all was how she never smiled. Not even when the palace chef brought out birthday cakes, or when the royal horses pranced in the courtyard. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself paying closer attention to the family dynamics during his shifts. King Edward was often away on official business, leaving Queen Victoria to manage the household. The Queen appeared perfect in public, with her elegant dresses and practiced smile, but Marcus's trained eye caught the subtle signs of tension that others missed. During his evening patrol around the palace grounds, Marcus often passed by the family quarters. He could hear raised voices echoing through the tall windows, though the words were unclear. Sometimes there would be long periods of silence that felt heavier than the shouting. On several occasions, he spotted Emma sitting alone on her bedroom windowsill, staring out at the gardens with tears streaming down her cheeks. The other guards respected Marcus for his keen observation skills and his ability to sense trouble before it happened. These instincts had served him well in protecting the royal family from external threats. But now they were alerting him to something happening within the palace walls themselves. He began documenting his observations in his private journal, noting dates and times when Emma seemed particularly distressed. One afternoon, while standing at his post near the main entrance, Marcus watched as Emma walked past with her nanny. The child moved slowly, favoring her left side, and when she thought no one was looking, she gently touched her ribs with a wince. The nanny, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, seemed genuinely concerned about Emma, but appeared powerless to do anything about the situation. Marcus had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, but he was beginning to realize that sometimes the greatest threats came from within. The protocol was clear about maintaining boundaries and not interfering in family matters. But his conscience was growing heavier with each passing day. He had seen enough in his military service to recognize the signs of abuse, and everything about Emma's behavior and demeanor was setting off alarm bells in his mind. That evening, as Marcus completed his rounds, he made a decision that would change everything. He could no longer stand by and watch a child suffer, regardless of the consequences to his career or position. The little girl's silent cries for help had reached him, and he knew he had to find a way to respond, even if it meant breaking the very protocols he had sworn to uphold. The turning point came on a cold Tuesday morning when Marcus was assigned to escort duty inside the palace. As he walked through the ornate hallways, his polished boots echoing against the marble floors, he heard something that made his blood run cold. From behind the closed doors of the Queen's private study came the sound of Emma's muffled sobbing, followed by Queen Victoria's harsh voice cutting through the air like a blade. Marcus positioned himself strategically near a decorative pillar where he could observe without being noticed. Through the partially open door, he witnessed Queen Victoria grabbing Emma's arm roughly, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the child's pale skin. The Queen's face, usually composed for public appearances, was twisted with anger and frustration. Emma stood frozen, tears flowing silently as she endured the verbal assault about her clumsiness and how she was an embarrassment. To the royal family, the scene lasted only minutes, but it confirmed Marcus's worst fears. When Queen Victoria finally released Emma's arm, the child stumbled backward, clearly in pain. As Emma hurried from the room, Marcus caught a glimpse of dark bruises peeking out from beneath her long sleeves. The evidence was undeniable. Marcus felt his protective instincts surge stronger than ever. Later that afternoon, Marcus sought out Mrs. Patterson during her break in the servants' quarters. The elderly nanny had worked for noble families for over 30 years and had developed a reputation for her discretion and wisdom. When Marcus approached her with his concerns, he could see the relief in her weathered eyes, as if she had been waiting for someone else to notice what she had been witnessing in silence. Mrs. Patterson revealed that Emma's situation had been deteriorating since the marriage. The Queen had initially tried to bond with her stepdaughter, but when Emma struggled to adjust to royal life and protocols, Queen Victoria's patience had quickly worn thin. The child's natural shyness and grief over her father's death in a car accident 2 years earlier had been interpreted as defiance and disrespect by her new stepmother. The nanny explained how Queen Victoria had become increasingly controlling and cruel behind closed doors. Emma was subjected to unrealistic expectations, constant criticism, and punishments that went far beyond appropriate discipline. The child was forbidden from contacting her father's relatives and had been isolated from any source of emotional support except for Mrs. Patterson, who had limited access to Emma during designated hours. Marcus learned that King Edward remained largely unaware of the abuse because Queen Victoria was careful to maintain her facade whenever he was present. The king, grieving his own losses and overwhelmed with royal duties, trusted his new wife to care for Emma and had not looked deeper into the family dynamics. Queen Victoria had skillfully portrayed herself as a loving stepmother struggling with a difficult and ungrateful child. As Mrs. Patterson shared these details, Marcus realized the complexity of the situation. He couldn't simply march into the king's office with accusations against his wife. Without solid evidence and a carefully planned approach, the royal family's reputation was at stake, and any misstep could result in Emma's situation becoming even worse if Queen Victoria felt threatened or exposed. That evening, Marcus began developing a strategy to document the abuse more thoroughly. He started noting specific incidents, times, and witnesses in his journal. He also began coordinating his patrol schedules to coincide with times when Emma was most likely to be alone with her stepmother. His military training had taught him the importance of gathering intelligence before taking action. The weight of what he was planning pressed heavily on Marcus's shoulders as he stood guard that night. He understood that intervening would likely end his career and could potentially create a scandal that would rock the monarchy. However, every time he thought about Emma's tear-stained face and the fear in her young eyes, he knew he had no choice but to continue forward with his mission to protect her, regardless of the personal cost. Marcus's investigation intensified over the following weeks as he carefully documented every incident he witnessed. He discovered that Queen Victoria's abuse followed a predictable pattern, typically occurring when King Edward was away on official business and when most of the palace staff were occupied with their duties. The Queen had become skilled at timing her outbursts to avoid detection. But Marcus's new vigilance was beginning to reveal the full extent of Emma's suffering. During one particularly disturbing incident, Marcus was conducting a security check near the library when he heard Emma's terrified screams echoing from the Queen's private chambers. His instincts told him to rush in immediately, but his training reminded him that he needed to be strategic. Instead, he positioned himself where he could observe and potentially intervene if the situation escalated dangerously. Through the doorway, Marcus watched as Queen Victoria forced Emma to stand perfectly still while she berated her for spilling juice on an antique carpet. The Queen's voice was low but venomous, filled with threats about what would happen if Emma told anyone about their private conversations. When Emma began to sway from exhaustion, after standing motionless for over an hour, Queen Victoria pushed her roughly against the wall, causing the child to cry out in pain. That was the moment Marcus realized he could no longer simply observe and document. He cleared his throat loudly and knocked on the doorframe, announcing his presence for a routine security check. Queen Victoria immediately transformed her demeanor, smoothing her hair and adopting a concerned expression as she moved away from Emma. The child remained pressed against the wall. Trembling and trying to hide her tears, Marcus conducted his security check with deliberate slowness, giving Emma time to recover while sending a clear message to Queen Victoria that the palace guards were paying attention. When he finally left, he made sure to catch Emma's eye and offer her a small, reassuring nod. For the first time in months, he saw a flicker of hope cross the child's face. The next day, Marcus made a bold decision to approach Dr. Harrison. The royal family's personal physician, Dr. Harrison was a trusted member of the palace staff who had served the monarchy for decades and was known for his integrity and discretion. Marcus knew that if he could convince the doctor to examine Emma more thoroughly, they might be able to document the physical evidence of abuse. Dr. Harrison initially seemed reluctant to get involved in what he perceived as a family matter. But when Marcus described Emma's visible injuries and concerning behavior, the physician's medical oath compelled him to take action. They agreed that Dr. Harrison would request a routine health examination for Emma. Citing concerns about her apparent weight loss and frequent complaints of stomach aches, the examination took place 3 days later in Dr. Harrison's office within the palace medical wing. Marcus volunteered for escort duty, ensuring he would be present during the appointment. What Dr. Harrison discovered during the examination was even worse than Marcus had feared. Emma had multiple bruises in various stages of healing, defensive wounds on her arms, and signs of chronic stress that were affecting her physical health. Dr. Harrison's face grew increasingly grave as he completed his examination. Emma, sensing that someone was finally listening to her suffering, began to open up about the abuse for the first time. She spoke in whispers about the punishments, the threats, and the constant fear that dominated her daily life. Her small voice broke as she described how she missed her deceased father and how Queen Victoria had forbidden her from keeping any mementos of him. As Marcus listened to Emma's testimony, he felt a surge of protective anger that he struggled to contain. This innocent child had been trapped in a nightmare, while the world around her remained oblivious. Dr. Harrison carefully documented everything, photographing Emma's injuries and recording her statements with her permission. The evidence they now possessed was undeniable and comprehensive. The doctor and the guard looked at each other with grim understanding. They now had what they needed to expose Queen Victoria's abuse. But they also knew that their next steps would need to be carefully planned. The revelation would send shockwaves through the royal family and potentially the entire kingdom. As they prepared to confront this monumental challenge, Marcus felt the weight of his oath to protect shifting from the abstract concept of royal protocol to the very real and urgent need to save a child's life. The moment of truth arrived sooner than Marcus and Dr. Harrison had anticipated. King Edward returned unexpectedly from his diplomatic mission 2 days early, creating an opportunity that might not come again for weeks. Marcus knew this was their chance to present their evidence directly to the king before Queen Victoria could manipulate the situation or further harm Emma. Dr. Harrison requested an urgent private audience with King Edward, citing concerns about Emma's health that required immediate royal attention. The king, though surprised by the formal request, agreed to meet in his private study that evening after dinner. Marcus arranged to be assigned as the security detail for the meeting, ensuring he would be present to provide his testimony about what he had witnessed as they prepared for the confrontation. Marcus felt the weight of potentially destroying a royal marriage and possibly destabilizing the monarchy itself. However, every time doubt crept into his mind, he remembered Emma's terrified face and her small voice describing the abuse she endured. The child's welfare had to take precedence over political considerations and royal protocols. King Edward entered his study looking tired from his travels, but curious about the urgent medical consultation. Dr. Harrison began by presenting Emma's medical findings in clinical terms, showing photographs of the bruises and documenting the pattern of injuries that clearly indicated systematic physical abuse. The king's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to horror as the evidence mounted before him. Marcus stepped forward to provide his first-hand testimony about the incidents he had witnessed over the past several weeks. He described Queen Victoria's calculated behavior, the timing of the abuse to avoid detection, and Emma's obvious fear and distress. His detailed journal entries, complete with dates and times, painted a comprehensive picture of the ongoing abuse that had been hidden from the king's view. King Edward's face grew pale as he absorbed the magnitude of what had been happening in his own home. The man who ruled a nation found himself grappling with the realization that he had failed to protect the most vulnerable member of his family. His hands shook as he reviewed the medical photographs and read through Marcus's documented observations. The king's initial reaction was one of defensive denial. As he struggled to reconcile the evidence with his perception of his wife, Queen Victoria had been charming, supportive, and seemingly devoted to both him and Emma during their courtship and early marriage. The possibility that she had been systematically abusing his stepdaughter while presenting a loving facade was almost too devastating to accept. Dr. Harrison gently but firmly emphasized that Emma's injuries were consistent with ongoing physical abuse and that her psychological state indicated severe trauma. He explained that children in Emma's situation often suffer in silence due to fear, shame, and threats from their abusers. The physician's professional expertise left no room for alternative explanations or excuses. As the full weight of the situation settled upon him, King Edward's shock transformed into rage. The betrayal cut deeply on multiple levels: as a father figure who had failed to protect Emma, as a husband who had been deceived by his wife, and as a king whose judgment had been so severely compromised. His voice trembled with emotion as he demanded to know how long this abuse had been occurring under his own roof. Marcus carefully explained how Queen Victoria had manipulated situations to ensure her abuse remained hidden, taking advantage of the king's trust and his frequent absences for royal duties. The guard emphasized that Emma had been too frightened and isolated to seek help, and that the queen's threats had effectively silenced the child. The systematic nature of the abuse demonstrated that it had been deliberate and calculated, rather than isolated incidents of lost temper. King Edward stood in stunned silence for several minutes, processing the information and its implications. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the authority of his royal position, but also the pain of a man who realized he had unknowingly allowed a child to suffer. He thanked Marcus and Dr. Harrison for their courage in bringing this matter to his attention, acknowledging that they had risked their positions and careers to protect Emma, the king's next words carried the weight of royal decree, as he declared that Emma's safety was now his highest priority. He ordered that Queen Victoria be immediately confined to her quarters pending a full investigation, and that Emma be placed under the protective care of Mrs. Patterson with additional security measures. The machinery of royal justice was about to be set in motion, and there would be no hiding from the consequences of the abuse that had been perpetrated against an innocent child. The confrontation with Queen Victoria took place the following morning in the king's formal throne room, setting chosen deliberately to emphasize the gravity of the situation. Marcus stood at attention alongside the royal guards, while King Edward, flanked by Dr. Harrison and the palace's legal counsel, prepared to confront his wife with the evidence of her crimes against Emma. Queen Victoria entered the room with her usual poise and elegance, clearly expecting this to be another routine royal meeting. Her confident smile faltered when she noticed the formal arrangement and the serious expressions on everyone's faces. The king's voice was steady but cold as he presented the medical evidence and witness testimony documenting her systematic abuse of Emma. The queen's initial reaction was one of outraged denial, claiming that Marcus and Dr. Harrison were conspiring against her for unknown reasons. She accused them of fabricating evidence and argued that Emma was a difficult child who required firm discipline to prepare her for royal life. Her voice rose in indignation as she insisted that she had only been trying to help Emma overcome her behavioral problems and adjust to her new circumstances. However, when King Edward produced the photographs of Emma's injuries and read aloud from Marcus's detailed journal entries, Queen Victoria's facade began to crumble. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she shifted her strategy to justification, claiming that Emma had been disrespectful and defiant, requiring stronger measures to correct her behavior. She portrayed herself as a devoted stepmother who had been pushed to extremes by Emma's supposed ingratitude and rebellion. Marcus watched in disgust as Queen Victoria attempted to blame a 7-year-old child for the abuse she had inflicted. The Queen's words revealed the twisted thinking that had allowed her to rationalize her cruelty, and her complete lack of genuine remorse for the pain she had caused. Her attempts to manipulate the situation, even in the face of undeniable evidence, demonstrated the calculating nature that had hidden her true character for so long. King Edward's patience finally snapped when Queen Victoria suggested that Emma had somehow brought the abuse upon herself. His royal composure cracked as he condemned her actions and declared that there could be no justification for the systematic torture of a child. The king's voice echoed through the throne room as he stripped Queen Victoria of her royal titles and announced that their marriage was over. The legal proceedings that followed moved swiftly. As the evidence against Queen Victoria was overwhelming and undeniable, the palace legal team worked to ensure that she would face appropriate consequences while managing the potential scandal that could damage the monarchy's reputation. The Queen was formally charged with child abuse and removed from the palace under guard. Her reign of terror over Emma finally brought to an end. Meanwhile, Emma began the long process of healing under the careful supervision of Dr. Harrison and a team of specialists in childhood. The child's physical injuries would heal relatively quickly, but the psychological wounds would require much more time and patience. King Edward took personal responsibility for Emma's recovery, spending time with her daily and working to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by her stepmother's abuse. Marcus found himself hailed as a hero by the palace staff and the broader public when news of his intervention eventually became known. However, he deflected praise and credit, insisting that he had simply done what any decent person should do when witnessing a child in danger. His actions had required him to break protocol and risk his career, but he never expressed any regret about his decisions. The investigation revealed that Queen Victoria had a history of similar behavior in previous relationships, information that had been carefully concealed during the courtship period. King Edward realized how completely he had been deceived and manipulated by a woman who had targeted his family specifically. For the power and status that came with royal marriage, the betrayal was profound, but his focus remained on protecting Emma and ensuring her recovery. Dr. Harrison worked closely with child psychologists to develop a comprehensive treatment plan for Emma, focusing on helping her understand that the abuse was not her fault and that she was now safe from further harm. The little girl slowly began to emerge from her shell of fear, aided by the constant reassurance from King Edward, Mrs. Patterson, and Marcus that she was loved and protected as the weeks passed. Emma's personality began to shine through the trauma that had suppressed it for so long. She showed glimpses of the bright, curious child she had been before the abuse began. And her relationship with King Edward grew stronger as he worked to become the father figure she desperately needed. The palace staff rallied around Emma, creating a supportive environment where she could begin to heal and reclaim her childhood. 6 months after Queen Victoria's removal from the palace, Emma's transformation was remarkable yet gradual. The frightened, withdrawn child, who had once flinched at raised voices, now laughed freely in the palace gardens. Her relationship with King Edward had blossomed into a genuine father-daughter bond, built on trust, patience, and unconditional love. The king had made significant changes to his schedule, prioritizing time with Emma and ensuring that she never felt abandoned or forgotten again. Marcus had been formally commended for his actions and promoted to head of palace security, a position that allowed him to implement new protocols for protecting vulnerable family members. He established regular wellness checks and created a system where multiple staff members were trained to recognize signs of abuse or distress. His experience with Emma had taught him that protection sometimes meant looking inward rather than just defending against external threats. The trial of Queen Victoria had been conducted with as much privacy as possible to protect Emma from further trauma, but the former queen was ultimately sentenced to prison for child abuse. The case set important precedents for how abuse cases involving prominent families would be handled in the future. Queen Victoria showed no genuine remorse during the proceedings, Reinforcing everyone's belief that removing her from Emma's life had been absolutely necessary, Emma began attending a prestigious private school where she quickly made friends and excelled academically. Her teachers reported that while she still showed some signs of past trauma, she was a resilient and intelligent child who was thriving in her new environment. The nightmares that had plagued her for months were becoming less frequent, and she was learning to trust adults again through her positive relationships with King Edward. Mrs. Patterson and Marcus Dr. Harrison continued to monitor Emma's progress, marveling at the child's capacity for recovery when surrounded by genuine care and support. He often reflected on how different the outcome might have been if Marcus had not chosen to break protocol and intervene. The physician had documented Emma's case thoroughly, contributing to research on childhood trauma recovery and the importance of early intervention in abuse situations. King Edward had also undergone his own transformation through this experience. The betrayal by Queen Victoria had made him more cautious in personal relationships, but it also deepened his commitment to his role as Emma's guardian. He established a charitable foundation focused on protecting vulnerable children, using his royal platform to raise awareness about abuse and the importance of speaking up when children are in danger. Marcus often found himself reflecting on the decision that had changed so many lives. His military training had taught him to follow orders and respect hierarchy, but his conscience had demanded that he put Emma's welfare above royal protocol. The experience had reinforced his belief that true honor sometimes required breaking rules to do what was morally right. He took pride in knowing that his actions had saved a child's life and given her the chance to heal and grow. The palace staff had learned valuable lessons about the importance of vigilance and speaking up when something seemed wrong. Mrs. Patterson, who had been tormented by her inability to help Emma more directly, found peace in knowing that her information had been crucial to building the case against Queen Victoria. The elderly nanny became even more protective of Emma, serving as a grandmother figure who provided stability and unconditional assistance. Emma herself gradually began to understand the magnitude of what Marcus had done for her. As she grew older and more capable of processing the events, she developed a deep appreciation for the guard who had risked everything to protect her. Their relationship evolved from protector and protected to mentor and mentee, with Marcus teaching her about courage, integrity, and standing up for what is right. Years later, when Emma had grown into a confident young woman, she would often speak publicly about her experience and the importance of adults who are willing to intervene when children are in danger. She credited Marcus, King Edward, Dr. Harrison, and Mrs. Patterson with saving her life and giving her the chance to become the person she was meant to be. Her story became a powerful testimony to the impact that one person's courage can have when they choose to act on behalf of someone who cannot protect themselves. The royal guard, who had noticed a stepchild's cry for help, had indeed broken protocol, but in doing so, he had upheld a higher law, the moral obligation to protect the innocent and speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Emma's healing and growth stood as a testament to the power of compassionate intervention and the difference that one person can make when they choose courage over conformity.